Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar regarding Google's Mobile First Index. My name is Johnny Waite. I'm the Director of Search here at Direct Agents. And with me is Rachel Medina, the Senior Manager of Customer Success at Brightedge. Before we get started, and while people are still signing in, we want to give them a little bit of time. We're going to go over some housekeeping items before we get into the meat and potatoes of everything. There's going to be a couple polls that we've set up throughout the webinar that we'll review at the end. These are just to gauge everybody's knowledge base, interest, questions on the content of the webinar. Also, we've allotted some time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So while we're going through the content, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A portion of the webinar platform. And we have a lot of attendees today, so we'll get to as many as we can. Additionally, Rachel and I have included our emails on the first slide. So if we're not able to get to your question during the webinar, or if you have any questions regarding the content of the webinar that you think of afterward, please feel free to reach out to Rachel or I. We'll be happy to answer any and all of your questions. Or if you have any questions about Direct Agents or the Brightedge platform specifically, we'll be happy to answer your questions there. Like I mentioned before, my name is Johnny Waite. I'm the Director of Search at Direct Agents. I oversee all paid search and SEO campaigns, lead our business development, operations, and R&D for search. Direct Agents is a mid-sized omni-channel agency based in New York City and LA. Our client roster contains a lot of media and entertainment, e-commerce, direct response, and luxury brands, as well as a bunch of different verticals. And our offerings cover the full gamut of digital marketing. So things like paid search, paid social, programmatic display, SEO obviously, creative, advanced analytics, email, content marketing, and so forth. So we really kind of cover, a breadth of verticals. We try to hit users in every aspect of their consideration funnel. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to give an introduction of herself and Brightedge.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. As Johnny was saying, my name is Rachel Medina, and I'm a Senior Manager of Customer Success here at Brightedge. For those of you that are unfamiliar, Brightedge is an industry-leading SEO and content marketing platform. We partner with our various brands and agencies like Direct Agents to formulate their organic strategies and in some instances pivot those strategies based on changes in our industry. We've been talking about mobile and this Mobile First Index for quite some time with our partners. Over the past year, we've been identifying best practices, helping our partners understand implications of the index shift, and really figuring out next steps with Brightedge users. So regardless of if you're formulating your strategy today or if you're deep in the weeds of mobile, hopefully today's content leads to additional internal discussions around the mobile index itself. Great to have everyone on the call.
Excellent. Yeah, and this webinar is really going to cover what we see as the biggest issues, biggest opportunities regarding Google's Mobile First Index. As is Google's nature, we have a pretty clear picture of why the Mobile First Index is going live now and what the intent behind it is, but also within the nature of Google, the implications of it can be lost. It's not always a straightforward one-to-one. This is what we're doing. This is what it means. It's more of we're trying to match user intent. And this is what we're rolling out. So if you see on your screen, we have an agenda up. We're going to go over, briefly touch over what Google's Mobile First Index entails, what Google has publicly released, what other authorities in digital marketing are saying. The importance of site speed, we're touching on this because the Mobile First Index is coming off the heels of a site speed algorithm update from earlier this year. what mobile optimizations we can employ for user experience and why that's important, implementing accelerated mobile pages, which we've gone over in past webinars, but I think is really important due to the fact that this algorithm update affects so many different sites. And then lastly, how to measure mobile performance, and we're going to touch on briefly, how to measure that, how to measure the share of voice. Rachel's going to touch on the capabilities of BrightEdge related to that, but we're really excited to get into today's content, and we hope you are too. So let's start with a poll. You can submit it here. I'll give a few seconds for everybody to click through. Like I mentioned before, the polls will render at the end of the webinar, so we'll be able to aggregate that data there. But this first poll is regarding how to optimize your site for the mobile first index. So we want to get a gauge on who out there is completely confident in what to do, who's fairly confident, who's not confident at all, or who's confused by what the mobile first index is. So I'll give everybody a few seconds to answer that, and then we'll move on. Okay, so let's kind of jump into what this index entails. I think everybody's been prepared for a movement to mobile for a while, either through their own data and seeing the shift in user engagement with the site, or through Google publicly stating that a shift to a mobile first index was coming. It's been something that has seemingly been screamed from the rooftops, but we want to understand clearly what it means, who it affects, and what to do about it. So this is from Google's Webmaster Blog. This was released in late March of this year, stating that the mobile first index had been rolled out, or was starting to roll out, to certain websites. We knew this was coming. They were testing it, their beta with certain websites, but it has officially started to roll out. Murmurings about the end of this index being fully rolled out to the web are said to take place in October of this year. Whether that's true or not is an unknown, as Google's publicly stated also they won't release the end date for this. But we do know that this index was rolled out to match a majority of their users' intent. So as we can see in this first highlighted section, it says mobile first indexing means that we'll use the mobile version of the page for indexing and ranking to better help our primary mobile users find what they're looking for. So Google sees a big enough shift, and we've been seeing this over the last few years, that majority of users from any channel have been moving more and more to mobile, some at a quicker rate based on what kind of site they are visiting, but it's definitely been a global shift. Also stated in this blog is that increasingly they'll be using the mobile versions of content to rank and index. So that means that the mobile version of your site will be eventually Google's primary method of ranking and indexing, and that they're notifying sites of the switch to the mobile first index via your Google Search Console account. So we're keeping a careful eye on that for our clients, but if you have access to the correct version of your Google Search Console account, I would suggest just checking the message center of that to see if you've been rolled out. You can also check the crawlers to see if you are progressively being crawled more and more by Google's smart phone bot. Let's also explore what other people are saying. There has been a lot of chatter from different publications, from well-known blogs regarding digital marketing on what this entails, what to do about it, what the implications are. If you look on your screen, I took some of the publications that we reference a lot. Search Engine Watch is making a very simple suggestion, but something that we encourage our clients here at Direct Agents to make sure that you're ahead of algorithm updates. Generally speaking, Google will talk about, things that they're pushing towards, things that they find really important. We've discussed moving to a secure site with a SSL certificate in the past, implementing things like accelerated mobile pages, moving away from the last click model. Those are all things that Google has really focused on, and we want to make sure that we're not being reactive but proactive to these algorithmic updates. So this being a major one that completely shifts how Google indexes sites, we want to make sure that we're out in front of it. If we look at the quote from TechCrunch, their big call out is that sites that already take advantage of responsive design or dynamic serving, which a majority of sites at this point in time do, shouldn't have to worry too much about this mobile index update. Really, Google's trying to provide the fastest, best, most user-friendly experience on mobile web as possible. You're usually part of the way there, if not mostly the way there, if you're properly implementing responsive or dynamic serving. Search Engine General, really has harped on the fact that this mobile-first index is trying to call out websites that have a vastly different mobile and desktop experience. So, one of the things we want to focus on when we are optimizing content on site, creating new content on site, or making design decisions is that there's at least, if not more, content on the mobile side as there is on desktop. So it really is a switch in how we're thinking about addressing website design, website optimizations, and that we're addressing the mobile side of things first prior to desktop. And also that we should be implementing all of our structured data on mobile as well. A lot of CMSs or, depending on how you're employing structured data on your site will apply your changes both on desktop and mobile, but definitely something to keep an eye on. And also, like I mentioned before, Google will not officially announce when the mobile-first index will be attributed to all sites globally. So we definitely want to get ahead of this and not wait too long, be proactive as opposed to reactive. Like I said before, Forbes has stated that mobile and desktop sites that are significantly different will be impacted the most, so we want to make sure that those match up and align closely. And, Moz, who we reference a lot for, kind of SEO updates, SEO data, SEO testing, has stated that we want to make sure that the mobile version of your site contains everything that your desktop version does. So that includes content, that includes rich images, things of that nature, functionality as far as navigation is concerned, and we'll get into some of the tips and tricks that we found work really well within those design changes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, who's going to be going over some of the data and the updates they found in the change in Google search regarding mobile.
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, so as Johnny was saying, this index change really does follow user performance and user intent. BrightEdge, we've been keeping an eye across industry on how much traffic in the organic channel is coming from both device types. As you guys know, as marketers, we've been talking about mobile being a very large focus of our industry for the past couple years, but now we're finding that users spend close to 4 to 5 hours a day interacting with mobile digital media. One thing that we've been working on with our agency partners and brands is to really understand by web property how much of that traffic is being pulled in from both device types currently. So we did a quick audit of direct agents clients, and across the board, not just for retail like we've been talking about in the past, desktop and smartphone traffic are pretty neck and neck. You'll see within your own instances of web analytics that smartphone traffic right now will either rival or even exceed desktop traffic. Now, within the same audit, we pulled an account that had both desktop and smartphone tracking in terms of organic rank. One thing that we found across the board as well is that the variance in average blended rank is pretty slim. So if you have currently a mobile responsive or mobile friendly site, you'll probably see very similar performance. Instances where the desktop instance of the site versus the smartphone version of the site is pretty different is where we'll start to see quite a larger variance in terms of rank data. But across the board, even if your rank is 1-for-1, the largest opportunity that we urge marketers to focus on are keywords with organic listings above the fold. For everyone on the call right now, you're obviously watching our WebEx via your desktop, but I'm assuming if you're like me as well, you probably have your smartphone either in your hand or nearby. Just given the sheer size of the two device types, there is going to be more of an organic opportunity on desktop versus mobile. Since smartphone is much smaller, the opportunity to rank in a top organic position on mobile is quite small. So understanding which keywords and topics have more opportunity versus less is something that we've been working on with our clients. Now, and to my point, the same exact positions in both device types is going to have a different impact on true organic traffic. Positions 1 through 3 in mobile have seen typically about 44% more visits than the exact same 3 positions in desktop. So understanding the nuances between the potential to rank on the top of the SERP for those two device types, and B, where your site stands is going to be key as the mobile index rolls out. So Johnny's going to go a little bit more into best practices. Site speed is going to be a huge component of what we focus on with our brands. So Johnny, I'll let you take it away on best practices for site speed.
Excellent. Thanks, Rachel. If you've noticed on your mobile phone, you tend to be a lot more irritable and a lot less understanding if there's slow site speeds. What we've seen across the board is some of the KPIs that we measure, things like conversions, traffic, bounce rate, time on site, drastically reduce as the time to load the page goes up. If you look on your screen here, an important thing to note is that majority of the world is not actually using 4G or LTE. A majority of people in different countries are still on 3G or lower, and according to Think with Google, which is a Google resource, about 70% of cellular users will still be on a 3G or slower network by 2020. This makes site speed that much more important. We need to make sure in the build of our sites, the design, that we're not bogging down each page with code. That being said, the functionality of a mobile site is quite important. And if we look at the data here, we see that each second you go up, bounce rate increases a lot. And we see that with each of our clients. As we're tracking mobile, every half second you add, the KPIs that you want to increase tend to decrease. So we really want to make sure that we're paying attention to design aspects, technical aspects, hosting aspects that are giving us the best site speed possible. Now, we're going to touch on a couple things that we tend to recommend to our clients. There are a myriad of different things, and I would recommend getting together with your SEO and your development teams to identify the biggest pain points in your site speed and how to correct those. Obviously going after the quick wins first, and then really hitting on those bigger implementations over time. But one I really wanted to focus on today was enabling HTTP2. It's known as multiplexing, and in layman's terms, basically what it is parsing out your content at once as opposed to singular requests from the server. So those are things like requests for images, requests for JavaScript, requests for styling sheets, all those different things that tend to go one by one in order, and parsing those out so that the request from the server is much smaller. Generally speaking, HTTP2 can be implemented through your hosting provider or your SSL certificate provider. And what we've been seeing with a lot of our clients is that either it's offered through either of those channels and it needs to be opted into, or especially with newer hosting providers or newer offerings from SSL certificate providers, it's already baked in. So if that is something that's an unknown to you, I would definitely check there. But something that can positively affect your site speed across your entire domain. So that's something that, initially I would definitely suggest exploring, as it will save you time from digging into the more granular site speed solutions. Now, on this next slide here, we want to get into some of those other wins. And any of my current clients that may be on this webinar, you've either seen a site speed analysis or you have one coming up that addresses some of the coding aspects of either your site as a whole or some of your main pages that really are important to your conversions or driving traffic. Google's biggest one, if you've ever had a call with your Google representative through AdWords or otherwise, they tend to suggest leveraging browser caching. That's one that really affects returning users to your site. It provides a good solution to people that have already requested information from your site, so that information is already stored in their browser and there's less bandwidth needed on the server side. Other things that are important to note, and what we generally see here at Direct Agents with our clients, is there tends to be a lot of requests made on the image and the JavaScript side. We've been seeing varying solutions that work depending on the need. With our luxury brands, images tend to take up a majority of the bandwidth and really are the culprit for slow site speeds. And that's generally because they're luxury brands. They want to have retina images. They want to make sure that their products are featured in the most beautiful, aesthetically pleasing way possible. But they're a way to minify those images. They're a way to scale them down to the smallest possible dimension that they would need so that the image is still scalable and it doesn't need to be quite so large. Other things to note is, with your design company or your product or development team, there's usually areas of opportunity where you have standard logos or standard social sharing images, things like that can be combined into image sprites that can be done through your styling sheet. Minifying your styling sheet in your JavaScript and identifying areas of opportunity with that. Minifying redirects or minimizing the amount of redirects or redirect chains that you have on your site can also be a big one. I would recommend taking a look at the redirects that you have done through paid media or affiliate groups that may be slowing things down. But these are tend to be the biggest solutions that you can employ that will really help out your site speed. And like Rachel said, and like we were exploring initially, the site speed algorithm update is coming right before the launch of this mobile-first index being rolled out globally. And generally speaking, with Google, that's not a coincidence. It's going to become more and more of a important thing to cover, either in your SEO campaign or your development sprints, and something we would definitely recommend paying attention to. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on regarding site speed is just making sure you are tracking it. If you are on Google Analytics, there's a very, very simple way to do this. We would also recommend using Google's Site Speed Analysis tool, and there are other third-party tools. So if you're engaged with an SEO agency or you're engaged with us, we have several tools that we use to normalize the data and not purely rely off of Google site speed analysis to get more of a true average of where your site as a whole is with site speed. But you can track it in analytics. If you look at the bottom left screenshot, this is under the behavior section of your Google Analytics account, and you can report on it week over week, month over month, and really keep track of it, especially if you're making changes to see what the improvement is there. You can also track what the improvements are as you're improving your site speed with the KPIs that are associated with it. Like I said before, the biggest things we look at tend to be conversions, rankings, and bounce rates. It's important to note that Google looks at two main things in regards to site speed. They're looking at your actual load time from your domain as a whole and also from individual pages. While it's not a direct ranking factor, they do have an acceptable range of 3 to 5 seconds. So if you're running a site speed test and you are above 6 seconds on your domain or on a particular page, you're generally out of range of an acceptable, what's accepted by Google. And they also look at the server requests. They're looking at time to first byte, and this is a direct ranking factor. So as you're looking at that, you want to keep within an acceptable range of 0.3 to 0.5 seconds. So if you're not within that range, that could be directly affecting the rankings that you're trying to increase for. And then one last thing I wanted to mention in regards to site speed is the screenshot I took from the right. This is from a company called Device Atlas, and they continuously run tests on different device types, being desktop, tablet, mobile. And on average, they saw that conversions fall by 12 seconds for every second longer it takes to load your page. So generally speaking, you want to be as low as possible, but for every second you're adding on to that, you're going to see on average, and this will change for every site, for every vertical, but you're looking at a 12% decrease in conversions. And also, we've seen massive increases in bounce rate for every second that site speed goes up. So, this is something that Amazon has really harped on. They've seen, increases in revenue in the billions for an increase or a decrease in site speed by 1 second, and it's constantly something that they're trying to optimize towards. So something we want to pay attention to, something that we want to track, we want to have good data on, and something that we want to continue to focus on as we are either reactively or proactively getting ready for this mobile first index. Now I want to kind of get into some best practices, some things we've seen work on our end with our clients as far as optimizing for the mobile experience. Obviously, Google is trying to create the best user experience as possible on mobile. They are constantly testing it on the search results side. If you're a constant Googler like I am, you'll notice that there are always betas being released on your phone. The search results are always changing depending on what you're searching for, especially on the local side or on the Q&A side or on the video on demand side. They're constantly updating it to give you the quickest, easiest, and most efficient results possible. So we want to make sure that our sites are as closely related to what Google's doing as possible. Before we get into the content of this slide, I do want to take another poll. I want to see, from everybody's perspective, on this webinar, how much effort are you putting into optimizing your site for mobile? Are your design teams involved? Are your product teams involved? Are your SEO teams involved? And just get an idea of how heavily invested you are in this. So the options here are you're actively pursuing improvements for mobile. Sometimes mobile improvements are addressed, but it's not your main focus. Very rarely are you addressing mobile, or you've made no changes, or you've made no changes since you've gone mobile responsive on your site. So again, I'll give everybody a few seconds. We'll be reviewing the results of this at the end of the webinar, but just take about 20 seconds to review that. Okay. So the first thing we're going to address is simple design. We work with a lot of creative teams, and while we want to keep everything as aesthetically pleasing as possible, there are some best practices regarding your mobile experience. Like Rachel mentioned, mobile phones are smaller, so there tends to be a lot more input on what is going to be viewed on that first viewport, that first touch point for users, and that can change based on the vertical, based on the CMO, the CEO, the design team that you're working with. But we do want to make sure that we're implementing best practices for users to stay on your mobile site. So highlighted here are some simplistic things, and they may seem overly simplified by nature, but something that I think a lot of sites ignore. The first one being is the static search bar. This may seem silly because you have such little real estate to work with. But if you think about Amazon and how Amazon handles mobile, generally speaking, they have so many options, so many categories, so many filters. When somebody is searching through Amazon's endless list of products, they're generally doing a search. Amazon employs a static search bar. They don't want somebody to have to take that extra click on the magnifying glass to open up that search bar. They want it to be front and center. And it seemingly has a very, very smart way of filtering out results. It's not looking for exact match. It can understand semantic search pretty well. It tends to give a very organized and robust results list. And it's something that we really push clients towards, not ignore that static search bar, and maybe even to sacrifice that mobile real estate. The other thing on this first screenshot here is a clear CTA above the fold. So the initial example we used for this was Progressive. They've since changed it to parent categories, but they saw really great results when they initially implemented that. Speaking with our Google teams, this is something they push for as well, that you don't necessarily want users to scroll before they can take an action. Target does a great job of this. They will place their CTA for sales. So anything that can get a user as far down the sales funnel as possible with one click, they'll do. And it seems to really have a good effect on their initial sales. In the second screenshot is a simple condensed category menu. Now this can still function if you're an e-commerce client. The sacrifice seems to be that, what categories do you place? You can still make this a mega menu. If we're looking at retailers on the e-commerce side that do a really good job of this, companies like Target, Walmart has really put a strong effort towards their e-commerce side and their mobile experience. ASOS, which is has been doing really good SEO for years and years and years. They tend to condense their top categories and then make an expanded mega menu off of that. But making sure that menu is easy to use. Target tends to not make people guess with the hamburger menu, although at this state of the game, most users know what a hamburger menu will do. And if you're a client of ours, I've pushed you away from that on the desktop side, but totally acceptable on the mobile side. And just making sure that you have your biggest traffic driver, your biggest conversion drivers on that first initial touch point in this category. And then lastly, this doesn't necessarily apply to the homepage, although it can. Is making sure that your H1 tag or the page title is above the fold as well. I know that first viewport is really important to a lot of brands with what's displayed. Is it aesthetically pleasing? Will it entice them to scroll? You still do want to give users context. So if you notice here, not only does Target place their page title in the top fold of one of their main categories, they also have breadcrumb navigation so that users aren't guessing what category they're under and where they are in the site flow. So we want to make sure that we're implementing these simple design changes so that users have a very, very fluid, easy user experience on mobile, and we're not seeing drop-off rates that are excessive on the mobile side. This next section we don't have to spend a lot of time on, but I did want to address. This is actually part of a Google update that was made a little over a year ago, but it has to do with mobile interstitials. We generally see this not so much on the desktop side anymore, although they still exist, but we do see these a lot on the mobile side. Mobile interstitials or barrier pages, either for email signups, some kind of lead gen, or a brand that's really focused on driving app installs. However, we see massive drop-off rates whenever a barrier page or mobile interstitial is put in place. Google knows that, and that's why it became a part of an algorithm update over a year ago. So we really want to make sure that we are avoiding any kind of full-page interstitials, and at the very least, if you were going to have some kind of push towards an email sign up, push towards an app install, that it exists in a very small slither, either at the top menu navigation that can be scrolled past, or if you're going to put it on the bottom of the top fold, and if it scrolls with the user, that it's small enough where it's not obtrusive to the experience they have as they're scrolling through your site. So it may not seem like a big deal, especially if email signups are something that you're driving towards, or if your main goal is an app install, but it can penalize you on the mobile side with rankings, and it can cause great drop-off rates on the mobile side. So we want to make sure we avoid those. And then the last kind of big point I wanted to touch on as far as design is concerned, it's something we mentioned when we were going over, what other leaders in the industry were saying about this update, is that you really want to make sure that your desktop and mobile experience are similar. And that may seem hard as, you're creating long-form content, or you have a page that seems to endlessly scroll on the mobile side. Users do tend to scroll more on the mobile side, but there are some pages that you need to have a 1,200 word count or a 2,000 word count. For my clients on the phone, we've pushed long form content for a while, especially since an average of page one rankings are at the 2,000 word count or above. We want to make sure that we have long form content on both desktop and mobile. Now, how do you handle that from a design aspect? I go back to what we were just talking about with Amazon. Users are used to Amazon on the mobile side, especially if you're an e-commerce client. You don't want to fight against the grain. If they're used to Amazon, you should probably design your e-commerce site closely to Amazon. Now, if you're creating your long-form content on the mobile side, you want to follow something as close to like a Wikipedia. So if we look at the screenshot here, and I'm sure you are all familiar with this, Wikipedia has a lot of content on certain pages, on most pages probably, but they need to handle that. They don't want to assume that users will scroll through every section to get to what they need. They implement accordions. It's user-friendly, it's fast, it makes sense for the content. You can still use page headers, sub-page headers, and it's still all crawlable content from the mobile side. So, as Google rolls out these mobile crawlers standardly across the web, we want to make sure that all of this content is not only crawlable, but organized within those H1s, those H2s, those main sections and those subsections. So implement things like accordions. Don't put iframes in there. Try to avoid static content that's going to create an infinite scroll, and really work with your SEO, your development, your product, and your creative teams to see what you can implement on the mobile side so that users stay engaged. I'm going to pass it back over to Rachel, who's going to go through the competitive landscape and what we're kind of looking at from the SERP. But within your mobile optimizations, you're going to want to pay attention to your competitors that are really doing these things well. Looking at mobile design, looking at the content side of their mobile experience and how they're handling that, so that you can see what you need to employ to be as competitive as possible.
Great, thanks, Johnny. Yeah, and we shared a few best practices across mobile optimization from Johnny's past few slides. But if you're sitting on the phone on the webinar and the examples we used aren't really hitting home to you, one way that you can start to identify what best practices are for your industry, your site, and specific pages and content types on your site is to be really plugged in with the competitive landscape across both device types. Non-surprisingly, live in the SERPs, there's going to be different competitors appearing across both desktop and mobile. A lot of times, the same keyword across both device types might have a slightly different and nuanced intent. So keeping an eye on who is appearing live in the SERPs on mobile will help guide some of those design and optimization best practices. For some industries, mobile might have been something you guys have been talking about for quite some time. For some more nuanced and niche industries, this might be something that you're just starting to cover within your internal teams. Keeping an eye on for those industries that haven't been super mobile focused, who's really excelling in the mobile SERP will help you identify who's really owning both design and optimization best practices across both. Now, this screenshot was pulled directly from Brightedge, so monitoring week over week who not just your business competitors are, but who's appearing within that SERP landscape. But feel free to use your tools and understand what those nuances across both are to pick and choose from some of the options that Johnny was showing, which would make most sense for your site. Now, we covered this a bit on our last call, but as Johnny was saying, accelerated mobile pages will definitely play a large component in our mobile strategy in 2018. So wanted to cover the shift that the industry is seeing in AMP pages. Now, historically, AMP pages have been associated with publisher sites and news-related websites. We actually recommend that AMPs be considered for more than just those content types. AMPs can be made the default version of your site if your m.website is either outdated or vastly different from your desktop version. If you do have a mobile responsive site and it's severely underperforming, understanding which keywords and which topics are actually AMP preferred might be a good alternative as they do load faster and perform very well in the mobile device type.
And like Rachel mentioned, one thing we wanted to mention is that there can be a great benefit to having both AMP and mobile responsive. So, if really there is a big problem on the mobile side, AMPs can be made your preferred listing on the mobile side. But if not, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be implemented. There can be a great benefit as far as click-through rates and visibility are concerned, especially on something like video, publisher side, even blog content, where you can get preferred or multiple placement based off of the same page. The screenshot we've placed here is for top stories, which Rachel mentioned that it's not the only place that you can implement AMPs, but if you do, you can potentially have 3 separate listings on page 1 in the top stories carousel, an AMP listing in the actual text results, and then your classic mobile page as well. So something that we would recommend exploring, if you're video, blogs, product pages, category pages, those can all make use of AMPs, and the capabilities of AMPs is increasing more and more. One thing I do want to mention is if you're on a standard CMS like Magento, Drupal, Joomla, WordPress, Shopify, there's a good chance that there's either a module or a plugin to implement AMPs. In some cases, it's not a great solution because there are a lot of bugs. You do need to, in some cases, install different plugins to connect the AMP plugin with your actual backend CMS. Or to track in Google Analytics or Omniture. But if you do find a plugin that works for you, you're happy with the design layout that's by default, it can reduce a lot of implementation and development hours. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on just briefly is just testing out your accelerated mobile pages if you are thinking about implementing or developing them, and pointing some paid media towards them. Now, it's not exactly robust, I would say, in what you can do with paid media pushing towards AMPs, but there are some capabilities that Google has recently built in. One is display ads through GDN on your accelerated mobile pages. So you can enable that through simple code in the AMP version of your page. And the other is just testing out your paid search ads and pointing towards AMP. And like Rachel mentioned, if you have a MDOT website or a severely underperforming responsive site, you may want to consider implementing AMPs and pointing your paid ads towards that. You may see an increase in click-through rate and conversion rate, especially since we see massive upticks in site speed when these are implemented. So something to test out if it's of interest to you. We would definitely recommend, with what we discussed in the previous section with site speed and the importance of that within this mobile first index, testing out an AMP, either if you have an issue with mobile performance, or if you want that possible increase in exposure on the mobile side. And then just to close things out, I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel and how to really identify the opportunities on the mobile side. How you can track the mobile opportunity, how it's different from desktop, and how we've seen success on the agency side utilizing a platform like Brightedge to really track this for our clients and model the differences between desktop and mobile.
Thanks, Johnny. So starting from scratch of understanding the landscape for your individual site, we recommend having a very strong understanding of how your desktop visibility differs from your smartphone visibility. In Brightedge, we do have a tool called Data Cube that's free form and is the market's second largest index of the entire organic channel, second to Google alone. We do have two different views that you can look at your organic footprint in Data Cube, both the smartphone view and the desktop. A lot of brands will be surprised that there is quite a bit just starting out of variance in those two levels of visibility across both. If you do identify a brand or competitive organization that's performing well in your eyes in the mobile device type, one very beneficial exercise that a lot of our partners have gone through is doing a competitive analysis in the smartphone version of Data Cube. So understanding for that competitor brand where in mobile, we're seeing true organic traffic. What topics is this competitor brand focusing on in the mobile device type? And that should give you a head start in identifying what the first steps are in your organic strategy. So once you've identified those topics and keywords and content opportunities, we can also run an opportunity forecast. So understanding where our site is right now in terms of Google US mobile, and understanding even with a few increases in your organic position, what that'll look like in terms of traffic, revenue, or conversions. If pitching the focus on mobile is still something that you're encountering within your SEO and development teams, going through an exercise of understanding what that lift will look like in the mobile channel should hopefully identify the importance of this strategy to your executive level team. Now, once you've identified those content opportunities, the keywords and the topics that you will be focusing on primarily in the mobile device type, we do recommend setting up a separate report to benchmark that mobile versus desktop performance. In these reports, regardless of your reporting tool, we do recommend tracking visits across both device types for those priority pages. That'll be directly through your web analytics account. Tracking the differences in terms of rank data across both device types, the differences in organic visibility for those keywords. So really understanding the nuances of how each SERP is formatted across both, and then also running 2 separate crawls. So regardless of what tool you guys are using for your technical audits, make sure you choose a tool that can understand how the Google smartphone bot operates versus the standard desktop user agent.
Great, and just closing everything out, and then we're going to get to as many questions as we can before the conclusion of the webinar. Really what we want to make sure is that the desktop and mobile version of your site is as closely related as possible. From what we're seeing, that is the biggest variance in performance. It will negatively affect your organic and actually, a lot of the metrics that you're concerned with your website if those 2 versions are vastly different. But outside of that, we want to make sure that we're implementing some of the best practices on the design side that we went over. Like I said before, if you're implementing responsive design or dynamic serving, you're at least halfway there, if not more. But there are things like AMPs, some site speed solutions that can help you there. That bleeds into step 2. Make site speed a priority. If it hasn't been already, or it's been an afterthought, it's something you should really be focusing on as Google moves to this mobile-first index. If it hasn't affected you negatively in the past, it may be because you're looking at desktop, or you have a fabulous site speed. But if not, it's something that we want to keep a close eye on, make sure, again, that we're in that acceptable page load time of 3 to 5 seconds, and time to first byte of 0.3 to 0.5, and make sure that we're tracking that over time. And then step 3, if you're redesigning your site, if you're looking at on-page optimizations, if you're creating new content or changing up the aesthetics or navigation of your site, address your mobile-first content design first. It's really important that users that will be using the mobile version of your site as a primary point of contact have the best user experience as possible, and that as Google is crawling your site, that they are getting the best output from your site as possible. Step 4, even if you do not have an underperforming mobile site, I would suggest using AMPs for that added benefit of increased visibility for your brand. And like I said before, this works for everything. It works for e-commerce, VOD, publications, blogs, anything that you're doing, can be pretty much placed on an accelerated mobile page. You can control, manually what output you want from an AMP, or you can make it global, depending on what you're able to design. And also test it with your paid media teams. If you see within your paid search campaigns that the mobile side is underperforming, or your CPAs are high, try to push your users toward your AMP pages instead and see how that performs. And then lastly, use a tool like Brightedge or whatever your preferred method is to track and measure organic keyword opportunity on mobile. See how the landscape is changing. See what your competitors are doing. Make sure that you have historical data to go after. Make sure you're tracking month over month, year over year, quarter over quarter data to see the changes in your increases. It's really important to use and focus on the mobile side, strong data sets to make informed strategy and decision. So with that, we're going to address some of the questions that you guys have typed in throughout the webinar. There's a handful here, so we're going to try to get through as many as we can. But let's start off with, let's see. Do you recommend AMP for e-commerce sites? Absolutely. AMPs actually work really good with e-commerce sites. The three main areas of opportunity is product pages, users also viewed, or an aggregate page like that, and category pages as well. These can all be, they actually have to be marked up with structured data, so you'll get the benefit of organic search listings with star ratings, with pricing, with stock availability, and it's absolutely something that we would recommend on the e-commerce side. And actually, I'll turn it over to Rachel really quick on how Brightedge handles that, but they'll track both AMP visibility and mobile opportunity on the e-commerce side.
Yeah, I just want to layer in there for a dental practice. We can actually identify on an individual keyword level if an individual keyword is AMP preferred. So that takes a lot of the guesswork out. As Johnny was saying, there are three main opportunities, so those will probably follow product, category, and user also viewed opportunities, but we can kind of take out the guesswork there by understanding if a keyword is AMP preferred and then AMP compliant once you've implemented any changes across the page.
Another question here is, will AMP eventually become the standard? That's an unknown. It is a Google product, so we know that they will push it, and there is great benefit to using it. Like other things that Google's pushed for, like responsive design and secure sites, they haven't made it. You're still allowed to make an MDOT website. You're still allowed to have your site on HTTP protocol. However, there usually are benefits. On average, we've seen, on the HTTPS side, those sites rank higher. With this mobile-first index, everything that we're seeing implies that mobile responsive sites will get preferential treatment in ranking. So while AMP may not become the standard or something that's required by Google, it's definitely something we would recommend, either through the added benefit of having both a mobile responsive and an AMP page, or if you have a severely underperforming mobile experience. Let's jump down to, this is a good analytics question. Is there any benefit to using user-centric metrics versus default GA speed analytics? For those of you that aren't familiar with what user-centric performance metrics are, they generally take a deeper dive into what's affecting page load performance and how users are interacting with the elements you have on site. We're not going to get into go down the rabbit hole with this right now, but short answer, yes. I would see a benefit in using that over site speed analyses. It is going to require more tagging and more, robust analytics team to place tags, to implement scroll tracking and understand how to digest and output that data. But just so everybody knows on the call, the benefit of that would be not just what's your page load time on a given page, but like the elements we talked about, that are site speed solutions, like defer JavaScript parsing. So that means, can you defer a JavaScript from loading and the user is still able to view the page? Or is that going to affect something they want to interact with right away? And you really need to dig into your pages and say, when the page initially loads for a user, what are the things that absolutely need to be viewable and that the user should be able to interact with, and what things can take a little bit longer. I think that would be a really good thing if you have the capabilities for it, but just generically focusing on site speed, there are plenty of brands that don't focus on site speed at all, or it's been an afterthought, so I would say that's more of a step two if you're already focused on site speed analytics that are standard in GA. Let's go down to this one. Does HTTP2 work with HTTPS or is it separate? So yes, and generally speaking, if you're implementing a SSL certificate, either through your hosting provider or a separate provider, they will either give this as an option or have it implemented standardly. So yes, it works with HTTPS, and it can even be done through your provider that's providing your SSL certificate. Let's see, this one, have you noticed the year-over-year traffic slowing, declining, and mobile growing for your clients? So I'll actually hand this one off to Rachel and just kind of go through what she's been seeing with her clients on the Brightedge side.
Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on the individual site, but I will say that regardless of industry, we have seen year-over-year traffic for desktop transferring over to the mobile device type. Now, luckily, once we onboard a client onto Brightedge, we can dig a little bit deeper and understand the different content categories that are mobile preferred. But yeah, overall, across industries, we are seeing that shift happen pretty quickly.
Looks like we have about 30 seconds left, so we're going to try to get to one more. Let's go down to this one. If my site is mobile responsive, does it mean help with the mobile index? And as a follow-up, does it mean I should have less content on mobile? And how does it impact relevancy versus competition on similar content? So short answer is you should have as much content on your mobile side as you do on desktop. I want to point back to the section that we were using Wikipedia as an example, where they still had the same amount of content on their mobile on the mobile page, but they implemented something like accordions on the mobile side to make that content more digestible. So you should have as much content on your mobile side as you do on your desktop, and you should absolutely be looking at your competition and how they're handling that. Like Rachel showcased in the Brightedge platform, we are keeping a close eye on how relevancy changes on the mobile side, how the shift in landscape is changing across all metrics. But there will be a variance between desktop and mobile, and that would be the very first thing I would look at. If you're ranking, say you're ranking better on desktop than mobile, look at first how your mobile page is designed, and then do you have the exact same content on the mobile side as you do on desktop? So that concludes today's webinar. We were not able to get to all the questions. We will be posting this webinar on the Direct Agents website if you want to view it. And I'll go back to our first slide just so you all can write it down if you need to. But if you need to contact Rachel or I on any of the content on today's webinar or anything regarding Direct Agents' services or Brightedge's services, feel free to reach out to both of us. We'd be more than happy to answer any and all the questions that you have. Thank you all for signing in. We'll hope to see you on the next webinar. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.